So today I'm really happy to be welcoming Matt. Matt's a senior product manager at SmartRent, an enterprise smart home company that's focusing on the real estate owners and automating their operational processes. Matt and I have gotten to know each other quite a bit through the community in the last little while, and I'm really happy to have him as a community member showing up here, but also as a customer of Productboard, which is really great. Matt definitely has faced a lot of interesting challenges, and I think we'll have a lot to share for us on that side. He's worked with lots of different size companies and organizations, from Fortune 50 to Series A organizations, helping product teams really keep a laser focused on customer problems. And I'm really looking forward to the valuable content today, essentially, that he'll be able to share with us. So Matt, with that, I'm going to pass over to you to share screen, and let's get things started.
Thanks so much, Scott.
No problem.
So thanks everybody for joining. Again, big shout out to Scott and the Productboard team for hosting me. As Scott mentioned, I'm a huge fan and user of Productboard, so it really is an honor, and a big fan of the community as well. So without further ado, building hardware in a software world. As Scott mentioned, a little bit about myself. I'm currently the senior product manager at SmartRent. And like Scott mentioned, we are empowering property owners to effectively manage and automate their real estate portfolios. And this is really driven from insights that are at the intersection of hardware and software. And as a product manager, as a maker, really my core thesis and philosophy on where the product world is today is that the most delightful customer experiences are at the intersection of hardware and software. And for the past 10 years, software has been just moving at a staggering pace, and innovating from new incumbent startups, just really driving innovation. And on the other hand, hardware has seen relatively low amounts of focus from startups. And so my mission is to continue to drive basically the delightful customer experiences at the intersection of hardware and software. And so this is a quote from Mark Andreessen, who's famous for starting the venture capital firm A16Z, and previously a Netscape founder. He's also a great Twitter follow, pretty entertaining as well. But he published a famous essay in the Wall Street Journal in 2011 called "Why Software is Eating the World." And so he said software is also eating much of the value chain of industries that are widely viewed as primarily existing in the physical world. And was he ever right? Here is a quick look at the total number of unique startups that raised venture funding over the past 20 years, broken into 5-year cohorts, 15 years. And so there really hasn't been a ton of change in the Series B and Series C. Those have been relatively flat, some uptick. But where we've really seen just huge amounts of growth is in the seed and Series A. I mean, really strong. Almost, we're getting close to 10x. I'm pretty excited to see the next 5-year cohort between 2020 to 2025. And so, fundamentally, I think that software really did eat the world. And it became incredibly easy. It became much easier to start a software company. And so basically back in 2012, just a year after Mark Andreessen wrote that essay, was really the inflection point for cloud computing. And so in 2012, AWS hosted their first major annual conference showcasing basically all of the services that we now have come to use as software product folks that essentially made starting an internet business about 100x less expensive. You no longer had to rack mount your own servers. You no longer had to spend engineering resources managing additional capacity during the peak traffic around holidays and whatnot. And so it just became significantly easier to start a software business. And so from that, obviously, we saw sort of the explosion in just seed and Series A businesses. And from there, it's only gotten easier. There are all of these internet platforms today that just make building software businesses, software applications even easier. Stripe Atlas, for example, it takes about 10 minutes to incorporate a new business, and they get full access to the Stripe payments platform. Want to sell anything online? It's never been easier with Shopify. For $30 a month to have a custom online storefront and start accepting payments. And you can do all of your own branding, marketing, web hosting. Shopify will manage all of that for you. And then, I mean, that's just web apps. How about mobile as well? Bubble is a no-code platform. So it turns out for $25 a month, you don't even have to know how to code to actually build really well-designed, scalable, both desktop and mobile web apps on Bubble. And you can recreate, maybe not the network effects of Facebook and Airbnb, but you can build marketplaces just like some of those companies. So again, it's never been easier to start a software company. But what about hardware? And so basically, my stance is that all of the news about hardware innovation is really at the cutting edge. And all of the cutting edge technology innovation has been dominated by the largest, most advanced companies in the world, leaving very little room for anyone else to innovate. And so here's a picture of the recently released M1 Ultra chip that Apple announced. It has 114 billion transistors on this chip, the most of any consumer chip ever. It was built on the 5 nanometer process by a company called TSMC, the leader in semiconductor manufacturing, who was founded 35 years ago and plans to spend $40 billion this year just on building out both the facilities and purchasing the actual machines to develop these chips using EUV lithography. So suffice it to say, this would be a pretty tough market to break into. And Tesla self-driving. There are 8 cameras on each Tesla cars, and there's just been a massive amount of R&D spent on computer vision and AI that's gone into creating this self-driving automation. And it's almost impossible for any product team to compete with companies of this size. Anytime somebody says, how do we build hardware to compete? It would be almost impossible to compete with this without just a staggering amount of resources. And how about landing rockets that are 230 feet tall, the same size as a giant sequoia tree, landing rocket boosters on drone ships, in this picture on land here. It would be pretty hard from a hardware perspective to compete with any of these companies. But with that said, it's really no surprise that we get a number of hardware objections whenever product folks, makers pitch a hardware solution from executive leadership. And so I'm sure I've heard them all. Hardware has lower margins than software. It increases complexity on the supply chain and introduces risk of actually delivering the products. It takes a lot longer to actually iterate products than software does. And I've also heard hardware can be a commodity. And all of these objections, in my opinion, have led to just relatively stagnant amount of actual hardware innovation from startups and basically new incumbents. And almost all of the hardware innovation has been from, again, the large companies. And so what I really wanted to talk about and spend the majority of our time today on is a new framework that I put together that I'm calling augmenting software with hardware. And this is a way that us product folks can sort of uniquely look, and I'll show a few examples of this in a little bit, at hardware in a slightly different way and reframe the hardware conversation from being, this really risky, complex, costly endeavor to something that's going to really differentiate our products and build those delightful customer experiences. So the first lens of this framework is business model innovation. And I think it's critical as product people that we ask ourselves, basically, how can we create unique business models that better align with our customers through hardware? And again, I'll show a few examples of what that looks like. Typically, hardware is sold as a one-time payment and used over many years. With this framework, we're going to look at a few examples of how we're sort of changing the hardware paradigm to better align with our customers. And I know everybody's after ARR or recurring revenue. How can we help augment that with hardware? The next item of this framework is a focused problem to solve. And this is critical for hardware because, as I mentioned in the previous slide, hardware is very hard to iterate and is very costly. And so as product people, we need to build really, really tight requirements to solve very specific problems with hardware, or the scope just gets too large and it's almost an impossible task to take on. But if we have a really focused problem, we can actually tackle this hardware challenge a lot easier than I think people realize. And so the last part of the framework here is differentiation. And so if we can't actually create those delightful customer experience I talked about, is it even worth it to do hardware? But if we can create that differentiation between our product and the competition, we're going to increase loyalty, decrease churn, and again, uniquely position ourselves to basically thrive with this new hardware model that I'll talk about in a second. So the first company I wanted to highlight is Bottomless Coffee. And for all the consumer product folks out there, this is a great example of a consumer innovation around hardware. And so how many coffee subscriptions are there? I know, I'm sure, certainly I get at least 3 to 4 emails a day, Instagram ads a day of coffee subscriptions. And all of them, I feel like, are pretty much the same. They all boast that they have the best flavors, the best combinations, and they're all unique flavors and whatnot. But I think Bottomless is a really interesting example of how we can use hardware to differentiate ourselves. And so in this example, the hardware is the scale. And so that is a smart scale that will reorder coffee for you when you need it. And it learns your coffee drinking habits, and you'll essentially never run out of your favorite coffee bean. And so if we can look at Bottomless through our framework here, again, the 3 pieces here are the business model innovation. And so typically coffee subscriptions are sold on a SaaS monthly recurring, and typically you get however much you get, right? There's some number, they assume you drink 1 cup of coffee a day, and you can scale that up or scale that down. But by switching to a usage-based model, this is much better aligned with what customers actually want and helps to differentiate their products. So, no longer are you forced into paying for 30 months up front. you just put your bag on the scale, and whenever you need a new one, they just send it to you. And for some customers, that's a lot more frequently. For other customers, it's a lot less frequent. And again, this much better aligns with the expectations customers have on sort of the monthly subscription challenges in terms of actual usage. Next part of the framework is a really focused problem to solve. And if we think about the smart scale for a second, it's really solving three things. It's going to weigh the coffee beans that are on there. There's going to be power of the scale, which is a battery powered scale. And number three is it's going to connect that data to the internet. Full stop. And those are the requirements for the smart scale. And there are a lot of challenges, I'm sure, to actually building that out. But the fundamental problem of weighing something and reporting that data to the internet, to some software service, that's a very focused problem that we can solve. And again, hopefully this is inspiring you to think about some of the challenges you face as part of your consumer products on, again, really, really focused requirements so that we don't have to go and build 10 different hardware SKUs. They have one smart scale. And so, and the really unique differentiating part of this, other than the usage-based model, is the smart scale is free. Typically, hardware is a one-time payment. They are giving away smart scales. And by giving away the smart scale and introducing you to the usage-based model, the idea is that there's really this unique alignment between customers and Bottomless. So churn is way down. And once you're sort of into their funnel and you have the smart scale, it's just a much better product than the other coffee subscriptions. So, what I really like to think about is just how they're creating differentiation here by, again, introducing a free hardware product that scales across all of their customers, that, again, there's one SKU of, and it's almost used as a customer acquisition tool. And so if we, instead of thinking about hardware as this cost center issue with supply chain complexity, and start thinking of it as almost a customer acquisition tool, where we're giving away the hardware for the software subscription revenue that's to come. And this is, again, just part of that customer acquisition cost. I think hardware becomes a lot more attractive in the business model. Let's look at another example, which is Square. Square, been around for a long time. And I think when I first saw this, it was just a light bulb went off in my brain of like, wow, this is a perfect example of how hardware really does augment the customer experience for Square customers, which are small businesses. And essentially the problem that they were facing, that they're trying to solve, is that their customers are small businesses that are taking payments. And it was basically impossible to accept a credit card payment at a farmer's market stand with just your phone, without an internet connection for your typical credit card reader. And so, Square's challenge is, how do I, enable the phone to accept credit card payments in an offline fashion? And hence the Square credit card magnetic stripe reader is born. And if we go back to the framework here and just think through how Square fits into this, the business model innovation, this is another free hardware product. So your first Square reader is free. And again, any new business that's standing up, any new small business that wants to accept payments can get a Square card reader for free. And Square is also using a usage-based billing model where, since anyone can basically accept payments, they're taking transaction fees from all the payments that happen on the network. And this card reader enables Square merchants to, again, sell offline, essentially beat their customers where they're at to expand these small businesses. And so if we think about from a hardware perspective, a really focused problem to solve here, I mean, you can almost break it down into two portions for just the hardware piece, which are, one, we need to read the credit card data through the Square reader. And number two, it needs to plug in and be powered by the phone's either audio or lightning jack. And so this is the core differentiator of their product from all of the other card reader terminals that had previously existed. And obviously, there's a lot of complexity and security examples with this. But for all of the B2B or B2 small business product makers that are out there listening to this, hopefully this is inspiring to think about, again, who is your customer here, number one, and number two, what problems can we solve with the hardware mechanism that in this business model is free, that we can capitalize on them on their, either whether it be software subscription or usage-based billing over the long term. So I'm sure, while those are good examples, like where should product teams really start here? And so the very first thing as a product leader that I would suggest is identify ways to better align your pricing model or acquisition strategy. And so this is where I think as product makers, we really need to ideate on how can I differentiate my products with hardware? How can I figure out a better model or acquisition strategy for my SaaS subscription? Because, without question, I'm certainly not advocating that, software companies become hardware companies. I'm simply stating that, for example, I've always wondered why Zoom doesn't sell, for example, like a red light that they could, somebody could put outside their office so that people know that if they're on a Zoom call or not. How can you essentially acquire or a mic system or a camera system that's works really well on Zoom? Can you use hardware to sort of improve your acquisition of all of these SaaS customers? And so by doing that, right, we can view hardware rather than as this sort of cost center, really expensive, slow to iterate process into a customer acquisition strategy, where we're going to basically decrease that customer acquisition cost we have to spend on marketing, use that as something we can fuel this hardware and increase customer loyalty over the long term, increase our lifetime value of our customers. I think back to the Square example and how, their Square readers, they still sell the same Square reader they sold 8 years ago. It feels like almost 10 years ago. And I think it's a really unique case where if you really nail the value proposition of the hardware, you can sell it for a really long time and you don't have to generate a lot of new SKUs. Square has introduced a lot of additional pieces of hardware like terminals with tablets, accepting contactless payment as well. But the fundamental business problem of offline credit card payments, there's still the same solution for that today, and that still exists. And while that's a challenging problem from a security perspective, I feel the very same way about the bottomless scale. It solves a very specific problem where you don't have to go out and build 100 different SKUs. Okay, you have one smart scale, and by having a single smart scale, we can really get leverage on our costs because we can use that single SKU for all or most of our customers. The next is this very specific customer problem that I was just talking about. And so if we think back to the smart scale and how just breaking that down into very specific product requirements, I think this is where product makers can really differentiate themselves. Is, our job is really to translate business, requirements into technical requirements. And so if we can very specifically narrow down on the problems our customers are having and figure out if any of those could be solved from a small piece of hardware, we can translate that to very specific hardware requirements. Companies are really good at this. And a lot of these have off-the-shelf components. And that's really the important part there, is if we're able to essentially narrow down exactly what the requirements are for this specific piece of hardware, we're going to very easily be able to use exactly what's out there. And let's use maybe a more specific example. So once you have all this documented in terms of the process here, and you feel like you have a really, really strong business case, this is where we can start prototyping. And for the folks that would love to get more information on this, I'd love to follow up with you guys in the Productboard community chat, or feel free to, my contact information is here as well. But this is when it's a good time to start prototyping. And so the great news here, and I included this as a specific example, Raspberry Pi is an awesome platform for this type of prototyping. And so they sell a $35 open source, essentially compute board that has a really large community on Reddit and forums and whatnot, with sample videos and sample projects that exist. And the funny part is they have a sample project for a scale. And it's certainly not the final product, but just as a proof of concept of how this works, to take physical hardware and translate that into the real world. And this exists with all sorts of different types of sensors and whatnot. But again, weight is a really good example of essentially a starting place, of something to think about that's very possible, that you could stand up for prototype for less than $100 in terms of just standing up a scale that connects to the internet, that displays a weight. And if those are the business requirements, that's very possible. And so hopefully this speech has inspired you to think about these business challenges in a different way, where rather than having to think about sort of the cutting edge of 114 billion transistors or self-driving cars, starting really, really small with a very, very specific customer problem. And then essentially being able to scale that across all of your customer base. So if you do want to talk about additional information, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to put you in touch with some of the folks that can actually help manufacture some of these parts and facilities and help facilitate that conversation. I spend the majority of my time talking about door hardware and contact sensors and whatnot. So there's nothing I love more than the intersection of hardware and software. I'd be happy to sort of help facilitate. So with that, Scott, are there any questions?
Don't see any questions yet, Matt. I don't know if are you wrapping up here? This is the end of this. We maybe can open it up for Q&A for anybody that's attended here today. Anything they want to ask Matt about, particularly on the hardware front, we can give them just a moment on that side. In the meantime, I guess I'm really curious on what are the trends and patterns you're seeing in terms of the change of costing around hardware. I know you mentioned, like, obviously, like it's very approachable and now easier to do, but are you seeing some patterns here where it's dropping, very quickly? That those ability to maybe put together components in not just a prototype, but actually in almost a very shippable product very quickly that addresses the packaging and the sort of containerization of all that hardware. I'm just curious, like on the patterns you're seeing there on that side.
Yeah, good question. we've all read about the supply chain issues, and those are extremely real. And I think across the board, we're seeing just real challenge of getting components. Now, the good news is that, like we talked about before, hardware has traditionally been a commodity. And so long as you don't need any of the most pressing, cutting edge technology, there are lots of silicon chips that exist that can do this type of compute, when all we're talking about is weighing something. And this is when it's critically important to just narrow down on exactly what those problems are, so that you're not trying to necessarily build the world. So yes, I read all about the supply chain issues. Yes, costs have gone up significantly with inflation in terms of the actual hardware pieces, but so long as we can really focus in on a very specific, customer problem, it's a lot more approachable than I think people realize.
Yeah, that's great to hear. We got one question here. I guess maybe I'm going to try to paraphrase it here. How does Apple or Tesla manage their product organization, especially the hardware and software challenges? I don't know if you got any insights you can share there.
I wish I knew, truthfully. I mean, when you talk about experts at it, I'll tell you that's certainly people I look up to in terms of hardware. So, I certainly can't speak directly for them. I'll just say typically some of the good strategies are, and this is when you're further down the road. This presentation is really more about how do you go 0 to 1 in terms of introducing a hardware product. But let's say you are at a little bit more scale with your hardware setup. And obviously Tesla and Apple you couldn't be at bigger scales, but this is when you can get really smart about forecasting what your demand is going to look like. And so typically, when it comes to those type of products, they're thinking 5 to 10 years ahead, and they're basically prototyping further out into the future than any of this would be. And so they can really focus specifically on their inventory supply challenges that way by having that vision of 5 to 10 years out. And a lot of these decisions are locked down further out than we realize. And so, in my mind, when it comes to managing that product organization, it's a lot about trade-offs. And so basically by creating those requirements for the engineering teams and whatnot, we can, again, have to think about what the future will look like 3 to 5 years from now.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I see a few people had another question here, maybe posted in the chat. Have you been successful with implementations of the Scrum framework in a hardware product development?
So this is a good point here. I think that as a software product maker, it's challenging to implement sort of the agile, any of the existing frameworks that work for software development, just because the iteration process is much different. And this is one of the challenges that we have to sort of overcome, which is because hardware products are much slower to iterate. This is why it's really good to have sort of a core problem where you only want to solve a very specific and one problem that you can hopefully scale across all of your customers. Because the truth is, it's going to be a lot more waterfall than agile. And so, if it is more waterfall, we have to build towards sort of one final ship product and build out requirements. And we're not going to get a ton of customer feedback before it's actually ready to go and ready to have some prototypes. The realization there is that we need to have a really, really strong business case and a really, really strong understanding of our customers before we can actually do this. And that's why I recommend just laying out exactly how you can think about the hardware slightly differently, where it's not this one-time purchase, where it really is an augmentation to the existing software. So,
yeah. Is the prototyping itself becoming more agile in the sense of the ability to pivot quickly because of, like, say, low-cost component or other kinds of things? But is there an aspect of agile that's starting to show up in that at the problem or solution stage?
Yes, and this is specifically what you're talking about. Sort of off the shelf or out of the box solutions. When you start to talk about custom, that's when this becomes really challenging. But when you talk about sensors that exist, when you talk about, problems that have already been solved and are sort of, we're just connecting these already solved problems to our software to sort of digitize them and enhance our software. That's when the prototyping actually becomes much faster. But to actually get a scaled product and manufacture at scale, that's what still takes time. But so long as we're doing that with out-of-the-box components, it really is a lot faster than people think. I mean, again, Raspberry Pi is an interesting example of just, you could purchase them today for $35, and if you have a pretty good understanding of open source code and there's a little bit of electrical wiring and whatnot, but there's video. It's an amazing community of people that have really put together step-by-step videos on how to do all of this. So
yeah. Sina's got another good question here of how should hardware and embedded software align? If hardware follows waterfall or software follows agile, how do we prevent the silos?
Yeah. Tricky question, truthfully. When I think about some of the, like, if we think about Square, for an example, I think that almost all of the work is being done on the software side. And this is, I hate to keep going back to this focus problem, but if the problem is really just, how do I read the credit card information in a secure way to my phone, the software can do the majority of it. And all of the innovation is really happening on the software side. We're just solving the problem of, how does somebody at a farmer's market swipe their card and pay for something, right? And no software can solve that problem. So if we solve that problem, and I think this is where we can sort of be a lot more agile on the software side of, once we have the credit card information, what can we do with it? How can we automate it in such a way on the software side to improve the customer experience? But the physical hardware, all we're trying to do is solve the problem of securely getting credit card information from somebody swiping it at a farmer's market.
Yeah, gotcha. Another one here from Chris. Any frameworks you can recommend to narrow down on the features for a very expensive product? He has a house as an example here. Later in the process, except for things like jobs to be done.
House is a hard one because it is just such a large product. Now, when it comes to an expensive product, this is where I think you have a lot more leeway in terms of your customer acquisition. And so if we just look at the basic equation of whatever this really expensive product is, and we think about hardware as sort of the acquisition tool, if it is something that's really expensive, we can actually justify a lot more cost for the hardware. So maybe the hardware doesn't have to be as narrowly focused as some of the other ones. But I will say, from my experience, that when you start to expand the scope of the hardware, when you start to solve more than one problem, this is where you run into challenges where you start to get into custom work that gets really expensive, number one. Number two, you start to rely on a very few amount of actual vendors. This is where we introduce the supply chain risk. And number three, we start to get lots of different SKUs because, again, with really expensive products, I'm sure there's lots of different customizations that people want. And so I would just say, if you do have a really expensive product, understand that the general framework would be, we can probably spend a lot more money in terms of the actual hardware to acquire these customers, and the equation makes sense. But just be aware that start with one problem and then expand to more than one. If you start with more than one, it's almost, you're destined to fail just because of how challenging it is.
Yeah, definitely. Another question here from Thomas. Speaking of going from 0 to 100, any thoughts on hiring senior hardware people from the beginning versus contracting external resources?
Yeah, and this is what I mean at the end with contact. Company, this is what these contractors, all they're looking for is really specific problems. And if you can come to the table with a really specific problem, that's what they're looking for. They understand how to actually build the hardware and solve those requirements really well. So I would 100% recommend, if you want to start doing this, start with the contract model. And if it goes well, that's when you transition to again, thinking 3 to 5 years in the future with an in-house resource that's focused on it. But again, just to minimize the risk of, even if this goes wrong, like we can just wipe our hands clean, you know what, it didn't work out, so be it. But like, start with the contracting side and then move to the actual in-house resource. And I mean, not to use Apple as an example too much, but look what they did with their MacBooks, right? Started with Intel, started with a contract. Now they've transitioned to their own Apple silicon. So you see this throughout the whole stack, but almost always it makes sense to use somebody else as a contractor before actually bringing either the design in-house.
Oh, that's cool. Awesome, Matt. Thanks very, very much for this. I think it was really great, interesting talk. I'm just going to kick over to a few slides to kind of wrap things up before we get going here on this. Again, I've shared out a link in the chat for everybody. Invite you to share your post-event survey feedback. I know Matt would love to hear the feedback on the talk and the session today, and so would we as well on that side. We do also give away prizes to some of the people that have entered and shared their feedback, so do take time to do that. That'd be great. We'd love to have you continue some of the conversation and discussion on this. As Matt mentioned, he is in our community. If you have a question about today's session or a conversation you want to start on that side, we'd certainly love to hear it and have you join us in on that side. We've also got a few talks coming up. Next week, we have Laura and Dina, who's one of our PMs here at Productboard. She'll be talking about prioritization. She's done a very large recent study on how different organizations are tackling the challenges of prioritization. And should be some really interesting shares from that particular piece. May the 12th, we've also got Michelle Hansen in talking about troubleshooting user interviews. So if you're trying to get into that, maybe some of that hardware discovery or some of the other discovery work that you need to do, her tips and advice from her great book, Deploy Empathy, here will be really fantastic. And just a quick notice as well that we're going to be doing another mini conference towards the end of May, first 2 days of June. We've got 12 fantastic speakers doing 4 sessions per day. We'll be opening registration on this particular piece next week, and lots of events coming as well in June that you'll see posted here shortly within our community as well on that side. Lots of other ways as well to get involved in the community, whether that's participating in our monthly roundtables, meeting a maker, which is some of our one-on-one matching opportunity to talk to other people that are within the community. And again, sessions like this, put yourself out there if you've got something to share, some expertise you want to bring to the table. We'd love to hear from you. Really interested here, particularly in first-time speakers, some of those people maybe that are underrepresented and haven't had a chance to share their thoughts and expertise. We're happy to chat and explore and see if we can find some fit on that side as well. Again, thank you everybody for joining us today, and have a fantastic Thursday. And Matt, once again, really appreciate the time and energy today and the fun talk and session.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, take care.